We have already been using methods both on the Xamarin application that we created and in this console application, but we haven't been even using the real names. So during this lecture, we're going to take a look at methods so you get familiarized with them. A method is just a block of code that is going to execute some functionality. For example, the main method is going to execute the functionality defined inside of this block of code. In this case, writing hello world into the console and then reading a line from what the user writes. And by the way, the write line and read line are also methods defined inside of the console class. We're going to take a look at classes in a later video. Right now, let's just focus on the method part. So a method is a block of code that executes certain functionality. And we can see in the main method how a method is mainly defined. But let's define our own method with its own functionality. Right below the main method, we can define our own. And the first thing that you have to establish in the case of a method is its accessibility. And by this, I mean if this method is supposed to be used only by this class, or whoever has access to the program can use that method, etc. Right now, because we only want the method to be used inside of this file, we can establish it to be private. When a method or where a member is private, it can only be used inside of the current class. In this case, it'll only be used inside of this scope, which is the program class. There is also public and protected, for example. Right now, let's just make the method private. After setting the access of the method, we have to establish the type of the method. The type of the method is going to define what value is the method going to be returning once its execution is complete. For example, we can set an int type. An int type is just an integer, meaning that we are going to be returning a numeric and integer value after the execution of the method is complete. Once we have the type of the method, the next thing is to define the name of the method. Let's call this method add. And once we have the name of the method, the next thing that we need, and we define this in parentheses, is what the method is going to receive. So the method executes some code and then returns some value. It can also receive some values to work with them. In this case, we can establish that we want a couple of numbers, a couple of integers. And it can be number 1. And with a comma, we can start defining the second value, which is also going to be an integer, and it's going to be number 2. And then we define the body of the method inside of these brackets. Now, right now, the definition of the method is not complete. And you can see that Visual Studio can give you a hint of what is missing. Right now, it says that not all code paths return a value. This is because our method needs to return an integer, and right now, it is not doing so. To return a value, you actually write return, and then the value that you want to return. In this case, we want to return the addition of number 1 plus number 2. So we can write that directly into the return line. Number 1 plus number 2, and semicolon. And that is it. We have defined our first method. This is going to receive 2 integers, is going to add them together, and it's going to return the value. It's time for us to use our method. And we can use it inside of the main, because it is the main method, the one to be executed right at the beginning. What I want to do is add some functionality right below the hello world line. In here, I want to use my add method. And when we use a method, we say that we call a method. So to call a method, all we have to do is write its name. Now, notice that right now, we do not have access to the add method. That is because we are inside of a static method. You may have noticed that the main is a static method, but this static word does not refer to its accessibility like the private word does inside of our add method, because the accessibility is defined as private or as public or as protected maybe. The static is referring to something else. For example, we could make this private static void. So we have the definition of the accessibility of the method, and then we are defining it as a static. Static just means that it doesn't need anything to be created before being able to be executed. And we're going to mention this in a bit more detail when we cover classes. Right now, we have to know that static allows the main method to be executed without anything being previously created. And that is exactly what we need, because previously the program does not exist, it's not executing. So nothing else can happen before. The main method has to be static, so it doesn't need anything to be created before being able to be executed. Now, because nothing is created yet, we also have to define our add method as static. This way, the add method also doesn't need anything to be created before being able to be used. And so back in the main method, we can now use the add method. And the add method is going to be requesting a couple of numbers. Notice that in fact, when we write the add method and we write the parentheses, we notice that it is asking for a couple of integers. And we can pass whatever integers we want and add a semicolon. And so the add method is going to add, in this case, 432 plus 543 and return the addition. But right now we're not doing anything with the addition, it's just being lost. What we can do is add a call to the console.writeLine method and pass whatever the method add is going to be returning. And we can do it like this. What is going to happen in here is that first, the add method is going to be called with this couple of numbers. The add method is going to add those numbers and is going to return the value. That value is going to be passed to the writeLine method, and then it's just going to do whatever the writeLine method does, which in this case is just writing that value inside of the console. So let's run our application. Remember to have this read line code so the application doesn't end. And notice that in my console, I already have the first line, which is the hello world, and the second line, which is adding those integers together, and then returning the value and printing them. So this is how we create methods, how we call them, and how we can make them return values. In the next lecture, we're going to continue learning C# by learning about variables and scope.